Last week I flew out to Miami to attend ADOBE MAX 2024, which I know seems strange for me. It also seemed like the perfect opportunity to have a little bit of a play with the Pyxis in my downtime in a more stripped down rig, and also skate around South Beach. So now that I have been to Miami and I've got the t-shirt, what can I tell you about the Pyxis that I didn't already cover in my previous videos? To start with, the bits that I was going to be filming were just for fun. They weren't a client project, so I didn't have to shoot anything in particular. I took the opportunity then to do a few different comparisons of compression ratios, and I also wanted to try a bit of movement on my skates and really just see how it deals with that, and if a bit of gyro stabilisation can get, to the place where with a nimble little handheld rig I can skate around and film some things and it works without having to get it on a gimbal and all the rest of it. Finally, seeing if there are any noticeable artifacts of rolling shutter in the moving footage. These were not exhaustive or absolutely scientific tests, and being in an uncontrolled environment, there's no real way that they could be. So with that caveat, let's get into it. I really wanted to head down and catch a sunrise at the beach, as my hotel was right next to it. It seemed like too good an opportunity to miss. The rig for that was super stripped down. I decided not to use an external monitor at all, or the EVF, just opting to use the built-in monitor for setting the frame and focusing. That actually worked perfectly well in this particular situation, and I think if I was shooting landscapes or possibly simple interview setups, and I wanted to go with something that was just a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter weight, you could totally do that. There's no reason why you can't make that work. As soon as you step into something where you have to look at the monitor and reframe and be moving and following things, then it starts to get maybe a little bit more difficult to work with just the side monitor. But in this situation, perfectly fine. Now, aside from that, I did have some real limitations on the equipment that I took. So I only had space and the spare weight for a Manfrotto B3 travel tripod, which did a heroic job of holding up the Pyxis, but the wind on South Beach in the morning was really intense, which I suppose was why all the kite surfers were actually out in force that morning. This ended up shaking the camera quite a lot. Also, the B3 didn't allow for smooth panning and tilting to track the kite surfers, which is a pity. And I was on a 135mm Canon FD lens, which really didn't help matters either. And because there was so much sand in the air, I didn't really fancy doing a lens change on the beach. I got a few shots. The camera was kind of shaking around because of the wind, and I was trying to get shots of the kite surfers, but not really getting exactly what I wanted to with that. Thought I'd call it a day.
So I was just down on the beach and it was windy as hell. My hair's gone over and my moustache is all wonky. Yeah, so wasn't necessarily the one, but I think there were some okay shots. But then I walk along here and I see this little avenue down to the beach with a hut at the end and a kite surfer and people walking along, and it's just the most beautiful. The iPhone won't do it justice, but I'll cut in the other thing because it was the shot. It was the one.
It is definitely my favorite shot of the morning, and I think that it just has so much going for it in terms of framing and action happening, and then it kind of leads you through into the other shots. Without that, I think this whole sequence just feels a little bit more mundane, but this just gives you a bit of a in from this other realm to the beach, to the kite surfing, to the sunrise, and yeah, that makes it feel a little bit better. And then out of it with the plane, I wish that was a little tighter match cut, but we do what we can. You could pull in loads, I suppose, but then yeah, I think it would just start to feel a bit too low res.
that camera, bro. Yeah, man.
It's a calculated risk.
Yeah, bro. Yeah.
When I was skating around at night, coming back from the various press events and things, I experimented with the 28mm lens and the 50mm lens. To be honest, the 50 was probably too long to viably use handheld on skates unless I was going for a more intense handheld aesthetic and without a subject to track. That kind of really doesn't work. It's just shaky and there's nothing that you're following to give the intensity to, if that makes sense. I was mostly shooting the buildings as I skated past, and that tends to be a lot less forgiving of the handheld nature of things. That said, I did get a few shots that cleaned up quite well with some stabilisation in DaVinci, and if you had a lens with image stabilisation built in, I think that would be quite a lot easier. The 28mm lens was fun, but it really comes into its own when there's something coming into the frame, say like this Mercedes coming past. That was cool, that worked really well. I skate along, I coast, I have this smooth shot, you know, we're just tracking in with it. That feels like something. These shots all have a lot more movement than anything that I've been doing in Italy, for example. The thing that I was most curious about was whether I would notice the slower sensor readout in shots like this where the camera is moving with some speed. I will caveat this by saying, of course, if you're doing a whip pan and you're moving the camera from side to side, it will be obvious, but that isn't something that I do a lot of particularly. Felt obvious even in the shots where I hadn't cut the camera because I was kind of concentrating on being on the correct side of the road in America and not getting hit by cars and navigating around and all of that kind of stuff. So in these shots, I wasn't trying to be smooth, I didn't even realize the camera's rolling, it's moving around all over the place as I'm skating, and it doesn't feel mad jello to me, if that makes sense. Have a look for yourself, judge it for yourself, but I think that it holds up reasonably well, and this isn't a perfect scenario, but it doesn't feel too obvious, and that's what I was most concerned about. For the stabilisation, I actually found myself switching in Resolve between the different modes. Perspective generally gave the best results when there was a subject and I was at a bit of a distance to it and there was nothing crossing in the foreground. Using the internal gyro, which is what I thought I was going to do more of, smooths things out, but it also retains more of the handheld feel, if that makes sense. It was more reliable when dealing with complex shots that had those foreground items shifting over the more distant buildings, for example. And it certainly doesn't feel like it's obviously stabilized at that point. It just feels like it's a little bit more handheld. And I suppose that makes sense. It's not working in the same way as the analytical stabilization, which is looking at the shot and then trying to work out how to stabilize it, because it's just dealing with the data that is recorded in camera by those accelerometers. What I wanted to see was whether there was a reasonable difference between the 8:1 compression ratio and the 3:1 compression ratio. I didn't really bother with 12:1 as it's something that I will use if I'm just trying to keep the file sizes down, but I know that it's going to be a bit of a hit on the quality and the detail. In this situation, that wasn't what I was really fussed about. I just wanted to see whether it was worth stepping up to 3:1 and whether I would notice that step up to 3:1 from 8:1 that much. I certainly did in terms of the data. The data definitely skyrockets. So what I'm looking for in these shots where I have one at 8:1 and one at 3:1 is if there is more detail in the image and if I'm getting a thicker feeling image in terms of colors and gradients, you know, just whether there's more goodness, more richness there to work with in DaVinci. Additionally, do the characteristics of grain and noise change at all when you have that lower compression ratio? Are you able to pull the noise out more easily? Is it going to give you cleaner blacks? That's what I want to see. I feel like maybe in dark areas where I'm boosting, and I am boosting the levels up loads here, it's not like this is how the shot would be used, where I'm boosting it up and I can see that noise coming through. In the 3:1, I think, when I'm looking at this, I feel like the noise reduction does a better job of getting a cleaner image in terms of like color cast and that kind of thing. Just general noise levels, it doesn't seem vastly different, just feels like it retains a cleaner black afterwards rather than skewing towards a color. But we're really into minutiae just here, and I think for the most part you probably won't notice too much difference between 8:1 and 3:1 in general use. Now, to be honest, when I'm looking at these in DaVinci and trying to analyze whether 3:1 is superior to 8:1 and looking at the details up close in a 4K timeline, for example, I'm really struggling to pick between the two clips. And I think, again, in the abstract, if I'm just watching the final deliverable on YouTube, I'm probably not going to feel a massive amount of difference. I do think that I used to be able to tell the difference between the different compression ratios for Blackmagic RAW a lot more than I can now. It feels like the codec has gone through various improvements and the compression is very well handled, in my opinion, at the moment. This is something I will continue to test, and to be honest, I'll probably still choose to shoot at the lower compression ratios when it is something that I am shooting in a controlled fashion and that I really want to make sure I'm getting the most goodness for. But I'm not feeling like I'm missing out on just general stuff, you know, just going around doing talking heads, filming, anything like that. Definitely I'd be going for 12:1 in those scenarios. The thing I tried with the Pyxis was shooting a bit of general event footage, and it's not really the camera to do that. You know, it isn't designed for that. But I thought there's lots of really saturated lights and screens, and there's some haze and atmosphere in here, and there's people and darkness and light. So it could be interesting to see. So if you're curious, these are the frames with that in. I'm only doing a very basic color managed workflow on this. I'm not doing a proper grade because I think that that is more of a what you get out of camera look for this. If you are interested in pushing it, clearly there is plenty of room to, you know, brighten it up, darken it down, give more saturation to certain colors, recover highlights, whatever you're doing. There's lots of leeway, but it really probably isn't the camera to be doing event footage on, but you could if you needed to. Overall, I had a great time at ADOBE MAX. They were very welcoming. There were all kinds of fun things to do. I'd never been, so it was interesting to see how that all worked and what they announced. If you do want to see some of my coverage of it, you can hop over to DIY Photography, where I've got a few videos looking at some of the new features in Premiere, and also just generally looking at ADOBE MAX and what was announced, and lots of talk of AI, so you can hop over there and take a look. If you have any questions, drop them down below, and if you are curious about the way that I had the camera rigged up for the skating shots, I've got a separate video on that. It's a link below, so yeah, if you want to know all of the granular detail, that video is for you, and it's down below. See you next time.